Continuing my series on the false memory syndrome nonsense. In reality, false claims of sexual abuse are uncommon. As with every other crime, false denials are much more common than false accusation, and tragically, real child sexual abuse is all too frequent. According to the best measures available, as many as 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused as children. In a survey of a random sample of over 900 women in San Francisco, sociologist Diana Russell found that 38% had been sexually abused before the age of 18. Of these, 28% had been seriously abused before the age of 14. Bud Lewis, director of a Los Angeles Times poll that questioned 2,627 men and women nationally, found that 22%, that's 27% of the women and 16% of the men, said that they had been sexually abused as children. If these numbers are applied to the present population, there are as many as 38 million adult survivors of CSA today. And this, again, was in the 90s. Despite the advances that have been made, most abuse continues to go unreported. Less than 10% of child sexual abuse cases come to the attention of child protection agencies or the police. Yet, inflated claims about the number of false allegations are now commonplace. In cases involving children, these claims are often based on the number of unfounded or unsubstantiated cases. These terms, however, do not necessarily mean that an accusation is false. Patricia Toth explains that unfounded only means that for whatever reason the abuse couldn't be proved. Clearly, it's erroneous to use that rate of unfounded cases to assess the number of people falsely accused. Similar misrepresentations are made in cases involving adult survivors. Just because a case isn't successful in court or a prosecutor declines to prosecute doesn't necessarily mean the abuse didn't happen. It only means that there wasn't enough evidence to prove it in court. False claims of sexual abuse do exist, but compared to the astronomical numbers of survivors who truly were abused, such claims represent only a minuscule percentage of survivors' accounts. Even if all 5,000 families who have contacted the False Memories Syndrome Foundation were indeed falsely accused, that would amount to just 0.01% or 1/100% of the estimated number of adult survivors of child sexual abuse in this country today. I'm going to kind of skim over this very loosely, but it says perpetrators rarely tell the truth about what they've done. That part of the confusion comes from people kind of having this idea that a child sexual abuser would look like a monster or look like a creep or couldn't be like a pretty normal person, and usually they are just normal people. They don't have to look or act like a boogeyman. Many abusers that we've met have been charming and personable people. If we didn't know better, we too would have said he or she could never have done such a thing. Most abusers aren't monsters. Even the ones who have done monstrous things are often successful and well-liked in the rest of their lives, such as psychologist Anna Salter illustrates. Several times I've seen members of a community write letters or sign petitions insisting that the police had the wrong man, only to have the offender eventually confess. Psychiatrist and medical historian Robert J. Lifton has come up with a concept called doubling to explain the capacity to lead a double life. This next part is in reference to the event that happened in Germany with the small mustache man. He wanted to understand how men could unalive, torture human subjects in medical experience, select who was to live and who was not to live, and then go home, attend church, and play with their children. To explain their seemingly unthinkable behavior, Lifton came up with the idea of doubling, a dissociative defense that enables the doctors simultaneously to commit heinous acts and to maintain their respectable place in society. Psychologist Brian Abbott works extensively with sexual abusers, particularly incest offenders. 90% of the abusers in his program are ordered to attend by the courts as a condition of probation or bail. A large percentage have not yet been convicted of any crime, but Abbott says that in his experience, false accusations are rare. What he finds commonplace is denial. Denial runs from absolute denial, such as "I didn't do it," to "the child was abused, but it wasn't me," to minimization, "it wasn't that serious," to rationalizing, "the child seduced me," or "I was drunk or high." If you define denial broadly like that, I see it in every offender who walks in the door. Even when faced with clear and irrefutable proof, many offenders continue to deny that they did it, often with great emotion and conviction. And their denial frequently continues even after they are convicted and jailed of child sexual abuse. And I think we have to keep in mind there that when only 10% of childhood sexual abuse cases are even reported, even fewer end up going to court and even fewer end up prosecuted. So the ones that end up prosecuted, I would have to think the odds of those not being really pretty clear in the evidence would be really low. And yet even those abusers still really adamantly deny. Brian Abbott says offenders get so psychologically invested in maintaining their denial that they can't break through it. They may have convinced significant people in their lives, their wives, extended families, employers, preachers, that they didn't commit the offense. Now they've got this whole chorus of people saying, "We know he didn't do it." When you have that kind of a strong alliance supporting you, it makes it much more difficult to admit what you've done. Sometimes the "I know he didn't do it" is said so often that the offender begins to believe that's the reality of his situation. There are other reasons abusers deny what they've done. They can't face it, they feel ashamed, they hope to get away with it, or they just don't believe it was wrong. And sometimes they're just afraid. The backlash reinforces denial. Mary Jo Barrett, Director of Training at the Center for Contextual Change in Skokie, Illinois, says there are 4 stages of denial an offender needs to work through before he or she can be accountable for the abuse and prevent further perpetrations. The first level of denial is of the facts. Something like, "I didn't do it, it never happened," or "she's lying." The second stage of denial is awareness. Maybe something happened, but I don't remember it. The third stage is denial of impact. "I didn't hurt her." And the last stage of denial is responsibility. "It happened, but she made me do it." I don't want to go over it, it's too long, but basically she has a 4-step program for working with these people because you have to kind of soften each level of denial before they can reach a place of truly taking accountability. She says that this backlash has made this process of healing worse. Before, parents would come in and it was just about their family and the facts of their own lives. But now they come in with a pathological take on their child. They say, "She's been brainwashed." So no matter what happens, the parents say, "You're under the influence of your therapist. You're under the influence of a 12-step program. You're under the influence of the Courage to Heal. You were a wonderful, happy child until all of this happened to you." They're doing exactly what they accused the kids of doing. Buying a party line and swallowing it whole. Such polarization stops the healing, and it has made the process so much harder. Barrett says that the worst thing about the false memory doctrine is that it re-traumatizes the victim. There is no empathy for the survivor, and the lack of empathy is one of the main reasons the abuse happened in the first place. Basically goes on to say that this false memory syndrome thing has just allowed perpetrators to kind of dig into their denial more, which impedes the healing process. It is imperative that we create a climate in which people who commit abuse can acknowledge what they've done and be accountable for their actions, rather than be bolstered by rhetoric that further reinforces their denial. It says that along with this theory of false memory syndrome is this idea that therapists and false memory syndrome is destroying families. And that the common storyline is you were such a happy child, and they'll pull out pictures of their children smiling. The adult children, meanwhile, are rarely heard from in these reports. Many of them have spoken or written to us and do not characterize their childhoods as happy. Instead, they describe years of trauma, much of which can be corroborated, as well as years of inner suffering, and many explain that, contrary to their parents' claims, they remembered their abuse without the help from a therapist, or they just never forgot it. Somebody's anecdote. "It drives me crazy that my parents keep going around saying that my survivors group put these ideas in my head. Why would I have gone to a survivors group if I wasn't abused? I didn't need a therapist to convince me I was abused. I went for help because I was abused. And the part about how they say I'd always been a happy child is just pitiful. I'd always been a successful functioner. I looked good, but I wrote in my diary at age 10 that I wanted to no longer exist, and my first attempt was a year later. Legal principles do not apply to healing. Irate parents and the professionals who defend them rely on principles that pertain to the law, such as you're innocent until proven guilty. These parents complain that their adult children won't tell them exactly what they're accused of, or won't admit them into their therapy, or continue to see them. But choices about how one conducts one's life are not bound by legal principles. We are all entitled to live our lives as we see fit without providing evidence to justify our choices. Most survivors repeatedly try to work things out with their families, hoping for healing and reconciliation. It is usually only after coming up against intraceable patterns of denial, minimizing, and continued abuse that they make the agonizing decision to pull away from their families. When there are rifts in families that can't be mended, it's always a loss with much suffering involved. But some survivors have found that continuing contact with their parents or other family members is destructive to their mental health and their ability to create positive and satisfying lives. I will do yet another part. I know this is really long, but I think this is all so important. Follow me if you don't want to miss it.